site. Now, a blog post isn't really complete unless we have a publish date. Right, so I'm going to use models and we'll do date time field. So the date time field can be either the date field or the date time field. It depends on whether or not you want to use the time of day. Then we can go ahead and say auto now equals to false and auto now add equals to false. And then I'll leave it like that. I'm going to go ahead and use a couple other ones as well. And one of them is going to be timestamp. And one of them is going to be updated. Okay, so the timestamp one will be auto now add being true. The updated one being auto now being true. This is to illustrate what those two values do. And then our date time field, well, I might want to allow it to be null and blank. Right? The reason being is like perhaps I haven't set a publish date yet. So if I haven't, then this can be an empty field. All right. So I've added 3 fields to my models. What do I need to do? Python manage.py, make migrations, and then right off the bat, it's saying you're trying to add timestamp with auto now equaling to true. Of course, the database needs to know about that, and we need to provide a one-off value. I can use timezone.now. That is fantastic. So that means that I can set that default value. Now, updated is going to set a very similar value. I just don't need to declare it. Only the timestamp, right? So this is basically saying that all of my old posts have the exact same timestamp now. So I'm going to go ahead and run python manage.py, migrate, and let's go ahead into our admin. Let's make sure the server is running. So python manage.py, run server. And we see that we now have a publish date. But those 2 other fields I do not have, right? I don't see timestamp or updated. So let's go ahead and just save this one. So this ID of 3 should have a different updated than perhaps all of the other ones. So let's go into our shell and take a look. Python manage.py shell, and I'll go ahead and do from blog post, or rather from blog.models import blog post. And we'll do qs blog post .objects.all, and the first one, so qs.first.updated, there's my updated date time object. I can also look at the timestamp itself. Not a whole lot different, but still a value. And I can't actually change these, right? They change automatically. So what auto now add does is says when you create this into the database, when you add it into the database, this field gets actually changed to that time. When you update it, whenever you hit save, this will change. And then of course the publish date is something that I would change, not necessarily anyone else, right? Pretty cool. So now that I've got this, I can actually look at another one. So qs.last.updated, and we'll see that the qs.last updated is the exact same as the timestamp for the other one. So basically it's set it when we actually added it to the database, right? So when we actually added it to our migrations, that's when that set it. There's also another error, which is these right here. I need to actually put some parentheses there to actually run that. Little small thing there. But now we have a publish date and timestamp. It probably makes a lot more sense to order things by these dates. So I'm going to go ahead and do class meta and say ordering equals to, well, if I want the most recent one first, I would do negative publish date. If I want the oldest one first, as in it was posted a long time ago, you would leave that out. So I'm going to do publish date, then I'm going to do updated, and then I'm going to do timestamp. So this ordering has to do with the query set, right? So the order of this query set. And before I change anything, it has to also do with the posts themselves. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the changes do. We made changes to our models, so we run python manage.py, and then python manage.py migrate. And let's go ahead and run the server and take a look at that ordering change. So if we look at our blog post now, we see that the third object is now first when it used to be at the bottom, right? So I'm just going to give that example. It used to be, where's the primary key or ID? Those are the same. We would refresh in here. Oops, not in that order, but rather the newest one first. So negative PK. This is what it was by default, right? And by adding these other ones, it allowed this to come out in a different way. And that also means that my list view should also be different. It should also be based off of the updated in blog posts, right? So let's go ahead and update this one. I'm just going to hit save and continue. So as of now, I'm going to refresh, and what do you know? That recently saved one is now at the very top. But of course, this is a problem because none of them have been quote unquote published. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So now that we have the publish date in here, we see that I have a lot of objects or a lot of posts that haven't actually been published. They don't have a date that was actually set for that publishing. So I need to use something that will eliminate those from even being displayed. And there's a few different ways on how you could go about doing this. Number one, in your views, you could modify this to be something like this. Let's go ahead and do from Django.utils. We're going to import the time zone. And then we'll just say now equals to timezone.now. So if I wanted to only show the ones that were published, I would say QS equals to blogpost.objects.filter publish date __ is greater than or equal to now, or rather it would be less than or equal to now. So it happened in the past, right? So this would be a way to filter these things down. I comment this out and I go to my blog, nothing's there. No surprise, we haven't actually published anything. We never said that we did. So this is okay, but the problem here is that it's in the actual view. So you'll have to remember to always run these things. So what we can do instead is use what's called a Django model manager. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all these imports and all of that stuff and jump back into my models, and I'll import the time zone here. So from Django.utils, import time zone, and we'll go ahead and create a model manager. So we'll do blog post manager, and this is models.manager, and then we'll just do define published. This is arbitrary here. So published takes in self, and we're just going to return self.get query set. This part's not arbitrary. And then filter, well, that same thing. So we say now equals to timezone.now, and then we're going to filter our publish date less than or equal to now. So this is this get query set thing. What that's doing is blog post.objects. That's it. It's doing the same thing, but it allows me to run .all if I wanted to, and as well as .filter. Cool. So get rid of that. And now to actually map this in, we just say objects is equal to that one, initialize it. So the fact that we're using models.manager means that I can still do everything that I've been doing, such as objects.all, such as the create method when we had that somewhere around here. So we don't want to have our manager be any different than models.manager. So we save that. And now in our list view, we'll just go ahead and say published. Save that, refresh, and didn't come through. Let's go ahead and rerun the server. And now that blog is also still empty, right? So it's going off of published. But I actually want to go even one step further. And that is, I want to be able to use this right here on any of my query sets. So in other words, going back into my views, if I did all .published, it's going to give me an error. The query set has no attribute published. So this is called a custom query set, and it's really simple to make as well. We do class blog post query set, and it's models.queryset. Make sure you capitalize the Q and S And then this time I'm going to use this exact same thing. I'll cut it out, paste it here. But instead of now self.getQuerySet, it's literally just self.filter. And then our model manager has to reference that. So we'll define getQuerySet. Hey, what do you know? Then we return our new query set of self.model using self._db. This means that it'll go off of our model, and this is our new query set now. So now back in my views, I can safely use .published and refresh in there, and sure enough, it does that. If I get rid of .published, it comes back to what it was. So naturally, I still do want to have that method of .published, and it's define published self, and this time it's return self.getQuerySet.published. Right, so this method now calls this one. That way, back in my view, I can do .all.published or simply just .published. Either way works now, but the .published is very important so that if I have a search feature, I can only get the published items as well. So that's managers and query sets. These are things that can get a lot more complicated than that. But the nice thing is that we can see at least some of the basics of how it works now. All right, so we have this publish date. If we go into our forms and we actually add it into one of our forms, like our model form, and we go to actually edit one of our objects here. Let's just grab one of the slugs, go in there and hit edit. We should actually see that field. So let's save this and refresh, and there we go. Got a publish date now. If I hit send and refresh this page, it automatically gives me the time. So if you just put in a date here, it will run off of that date. And then if I go into my blog, it shows that again. That's pretty cool, right? So it's back into actually showing it, and it works off of just a very simple field. Now, there are other customizations that you can do to make this being a dropdown and stuff like that. That takes more JavaScript stuff than what we're going to cover. So just keep in mind that if you pass in the year, the month, and the date, then it will run. It might actually be different depending on what time zone you're in. But yeah, year, month, date, that should work just fine. And then, I mean, because if you try to do, let's say, like something like that, it'll say enter a valid date and time. Right, so it's year, month, date, and there you go. So now you actually have a way to create a published post. And now, of course, you can go into the Django admin and do it in there too, right? So if you were to want to just create them on the front end like this and then publish them, which would be really nice if you had an author, like you hired somebody that's the author and they write a bunch of posts, and then you could go through and actually publish them. That would be certainly a good way to do that. Now, something that I do want to address is when we have this blog list view, what if I am logged in and I want to see all of my posts, whether they're published or not? Well, this, of course, could be a couple things. It could be something as simple as if request.user.is authenticated, we could then do qs blogpost.objects.filter user equals to request.user. And then that way, that user on that blog post list would see all of their posts, whether or not they were published. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to keep this like that, but then combine the query sets together. So I'll just call this my QS and say the final query sets are equal to the first one, pipe my QS, and then dot distinct. What this does is it combines query sets of the same class, right? So they're both blog posts. And then it actually uses only the ones that are in there. So it's like the distinct examples of them. It doesn't have duplicates at all. That's why we call the distinct. Like the same post is not going to be posted twice. So if I refresh that, sure enough, it shows me that. And then obviously if I were to get rid of this block or to even go into an incognito window, oops, let's try that again. into an incognito window, we would only see that one post, right? Because I'm not actually logged in. So then, of course, if there isn't a post, maybe in our list inline, if it's not the detail, we could then say if not blog post.publish date, then we can say draft, right? We see that, and now we see that it's a draft, and we can change these things accordingly. I could also say something very simple and put it into my card here and do like BG dark and text light. Those are obviously Bootstrap classes. And there we go. So now you have something like that where it's like, oh, clearly these are drafts. And then naturally we can add in some more text here and, you know, maybe like a small text. And we'll do class equals to text muted. And then just do our publish date. So blog post.publish date and small. Okay. So we refresh that and sure enough, there you go. Cool. And this one says none. Well, that's no surprise. It's not ready to be published yet, so we can leave it in as none. And especially now that I have these different background, perhaps it's there. Maybe we do warning instead and just do text dark. That way it's like, whoa, that's clearly a post. Or we just do border and border warning. That way it's like, okay, cool. That's not as overwhelmingly a draft, right? Cool. So now that we've got this, we can have our publish dates. We can release them. We can do all sorts of like better user interface stuff now that we also understand how to do model managers and custom query sets. Now what I want to do is actually have a way to upload items to my blog post, whether they're images or files. I want to know how to actually do that. Now this adds several steps to making this work. So we're going to do all of them in this one. And the first step is to actually set up our settings.py. Now, the reason we have to set up settings.py has to do with what's on the very bottom, and that is related to static files. So static files are any of your cascading style sheets, JavaScript, or images that you need Django to reference relative to your Django project. So right now what we've been doing is we have all of our CSS and JavaScript coming from a content delivery network. In other words, we have Bootstrap just linked from some other URL. Right? So if you actually want those linked in Django, you have to have a way to handle these things. You have to have a way to handle your images, your JavaScript, and your CSS. So that's just for static files. That's not for your uploads. There's another one for uploads as well. So we're going to go ahead and declare static root and media root. We're also going to have the static files dirs, and that's going to be a list. And then finally, we will have media URL. Okay, so static root. This would be a live CDN of some kind, like AWS, S3, or something like that. More than likely, when you go live, you're not going to have Django serving your static files. That's insecure, and it's not a good idea. But we're testing things out, so we can do it. I'm going to go ahead and put my static root outside of the SRC folder, and I'm going to call this static CDN test. Static CDN test. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and make another folder, and I'll just call it blank, because on GitHub, we'll have a blank.txt and says blank on purpose. I'm not going to have these files on GitHub, but the folder will be there. So this emulates what a static server would be, a static CDN server. It emulates something like AWS S3. So I actually want to reference this folder. Inside of it, I'm going to make another folder called static. And inside of that, I'll make another folder called media. So those are my static root and media root. So we'll do ospath.join, and this is going to be ospath.dirname of the base directory, and then it's going to go into the static CDN test. So this is going to be our local static CDN path. That's what this is right here. Okay, and then we're going to just use that path for each aspect. So static and for static root. Okay, so this is taking the place of as if it was a real CDN like AWS S3, and then our media would be in /media. Okay, so the next thing is we would come in here and also have a local version of our static files. So the local version can be inside of your Django project. This is where you would like make some changes, you add them here, and then they would be later uploaded to static root. So let's go ahead and make that folder. And this is going to be called static files. And again, I'll just go ahead and say blank.txt. In this case, ospath.join. And this is going to be now my base directory and the static files folder. Okay, so I'll actually come back to the static file stuff in a little bit. But for now, we have an actual place for my actual media. This is where I would upload files. And I realize that like a lot of these things are a little bit complicated right now because the configuration is just weird. I just added a bunch of folders and I'm not really sure what's going on. So to make at least the media part more clear, let's go into our model and let's create our image field. So we'll go ahead and say image equals to models. And at first, I'll just go ahead and call it a file field. And I'll say upload to, and we'll just say images /. And I'll allow it to be blank and null. Okay, so we made changes in our models. We run python manage.py, make migrations, and then python manage.py, migrate. Okay. Now that we've got that, let's go into our admin. Oh, let's make sure our server's running. And then jump into our admin. And now we have a field for files. So I can click on this field and let's just take something as a screenshot. Just do a real quick screenshot here and grab that. Got a file. I hit save and continue. And sure enough, it seems to have uploaded. Now, where did it go? Well, if we look in our project, we see that it's inside of the media folder, inside of the image folder, and there it is, right? So upload to was inside of that media root into that image, right? So it went into this directory. And of course, I already showed you how you could see what that directory is, but we now see that we can upload things there. Okay, cool. So now, how does static files work? Well, in this blank.txt, if I just said this is blank on purpose, save that, close it, and now if I ran, close out the server, something called python manage.py, collect static, and we say, you could say yes, or you could just run it. And now what happens is we have our local static files here, right? So if I had CSS or JavaScript or other images, I could load them from there. And all of those go into that static CDN test. We see static. Here's that blank file. It says this is blank on purpose. It also has our admin stuff in here. So this is related to the Django admin, which is pretty cool. Okay, so now we have our static files. We have our media files. Now we actually need a way to display them. Now again, if we're using a live CDN, something like AWS S3, they're most likely already displayed, regardless of if our Django project is in production or not, because our static files are being handled by a completely different server than Django. But while I'm testing locally, in this case, and especially how I have it currently set up, I have to actually have a way to display this data. And we're going to do that by jumping into our URLs here, and we're going to add it into a URL that will pretend to be a static CDN serving project. We'll do from Django.conf. We're going to import the settings here. And we're going to say if settings.debug. So if it's not in production, this is our, our test mode, then we can go ahead and add to our URL patterns. And we add them by first doing an import. So I'm going to actually keep this import inside of the settings debug call here. And I'll do from Django.conf.urls.static. And inside of this here, we'll go ahead and instead of having another list here, we'll just go and do static. And this is settings.static URL. And the document root equals to settings.static root. Okay, so of course those settings are the ones that we set in here, static root, static URL, and then we want to do that same thing for media. So copy this line right here, paste it in, and just say media URL and media root. Okay, so now if I refresh on this page and open this up in a new tab, I should actually be able to see that image, assuming that I have my server running. Oops, I didn't fully import the static. Well, import error. Let's run that again. Refresh, and now I can see my image. Okay, so again, if I didn't have that, I would not be able to see my image, although Django will still think that's where the image is coming from because of how I set up my media URL. Okay. Cool. So now that I've got that, I have a way to actually see my images and upload them. That's not too bad. Now, again, we would want to use something different in deployment when we go live, and all of that is covered in the managing static files of Django itself. Cool. In this one, there's a few things we're going to do. One is changing the file field to an actual image field. Now, in order for me to do this, I have to install pip env install pillow. So pillow is the Python image library and will allow you to use the image field itself. What this will do is just validate whether or not what I'm uploading is an image. Like it does make that much of a difference. So after it installs, I'll go ahead and do python manage.py, make migrations, and then python manage.py, migrate. Great. So now I've got that image field. Let's go ahead and run the server again. And this time around, when I go to select a file, it's going to have to be an image, right? It's not going to let me do anything but an image. So like if I went into, Django, notice that all of these things are kind of blocked out. So I will use that image, but what I really want is my blog new to have that image field in there. Now, the initial thing would be to go in my forms and then just literally add in image here. And of course, that would give me something like this. That's okay, but if you try to run it, it's not going to do anything. And that's because in form.html, we have to add in something called ink type. And this one will do multi-part/form data. You'll always use this when you want to have data actually come through with this value, with the data in your form. So now that we have that, we're almost ready to actually use this post again, or the create method. However, our blog post create view doesn't have a way to get the files. So it's simple. It's request.files or none. Like, not a whole lot different than request post, but since we've declared the ink type with multi-part data, we can now pass in files just like that. All right. So we save that, and let's go into our blog post now, and I'll say Tesla again with image. This, of course, is still just going to be one of my screenshots here, and I'll do ABC 123 whatever. Publish date. Let's go ahead and use something closer to today. Hit submit. Go into our admin to the most recent one. What do you know? there is our image. And notice that it actually has some appending string there. That's because when we uploaded this image, we already uploaded it, right? So this new one actually just adds some additional data on there to make it unique, so it's not overriding what's already there. So that's actually how you can upload images on a very basic level. Now, there are certainly ways to upload giant images, but that's not something that I'm going to cover at this time. And really, it's not something you should be doing on a blog post anyway. So, of course, the final thing that I need to do is have those images display inside of my inline. And that's also very easy. We just come in here. I'm going to put it right above my title. And I'll say if blog post.image. So if there's actually an image there, then I'll go ahead and do img source. And this is going to be blog post.image.url. The URL part is actually important. And then we do class equals to card img top. Okay, so .url is going to render out the URL that we have set up in here, right? And if we were using AWS S3 and specifically using Django storages to handle it, both things are certainly really good options and also really easy to set up. It would actually give us that URL. But in our case, since we're testing locally, it's going to give us a different one. Notice the image comes in and it gives us that relative URL for that image, as well as if we scroll down to the other one, right? And using Bootstrap makes that all responsive, which is pretty cool, right? And naturally, if I were to have yet another image, I could just do like sort of a sliver of things like that, and then blog new and say working image. That last screenshot, working image, and it's working. Cool. And then our date here. Go into our blog, and there you go. Got our working image. And the image is not linked right now, so I'm going to go ahead and link it. That's probably a better idea to have it actually linked, so when they click on the image, it goes to the blog post itself.